بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وبعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. All right, so the last time we were together, we were talking about congregational prayer. If you were with us, you might remember a couple of important points. Number one, the ruling of congregational prayer in the madhab is that it's an obligation. If you meet certain requirements, mainly that you are male, you are completely free and have reached the age of moral capacity. And then we discussed a couple of issues related to that in terms of how you can establish a congregational prayer, where it can be established, whether in the masjid, at home, workplace, outside, etc. And so today, looking at Bidayat al-Abid once again by the great Imam al-Ba'di rahimahullah ta'ala, we're going to jump to the next section, which has everything to do with the previous one, and that is excuses which permit someone from fulfilling this obligation, particularly when it comes to Friday prayers as well as congregations. And so he jumps right into it and he says, يُعْذَرُ بترك جمعة وجماعة مريض وخائف حدوث مرض ليس بالمشدد ومن يدافع أحد الأخبثين ومن بحضرة طعام يحتاج إليه وله الشبع أو له ضائع يرجوه أو يخاف ضياع ماله أو ضررا فيه أو في معيشة يحتاجها أو موت قريبه أو رفيقه أو ضررا من سلطان أو مطر ونحوه أو ملازمة غنيم له ولا شيء معه أو فوت رفقة ونحو ذلك. All right? So this is what we're looking at. Excused from congregation. So this means the following are excused from attending Friday and congregational prayers. The following, he gives us a list now. One who is ill, marib, they're sick, or fears becoming ill or sick while not already in the masjid, meaning these two. Someone who's sick or fears sickness, so long as they're not already in the masjid, they're excused. If they're already in the masjid, well then, you're not excused from Friday or congregational prayer. You're right there where it's going to be established. The next one he says, one holding back urine or feces, meaning you really have to go to the restroom to relieve yourself. That's number two. Number three, he says, one presented with food while in need. بِحَضْرَةِ طَعَامٍ يَحْتَاجُ إِلَيْهِ, meaning you're hungry, you need to eat. And food is now being made available to you, and it's permitted to eat until satiated. So you can sit there and you can eat until you're full. You don't have to eat just a little bite and say, okay, I got to leave it and I got to go. You could eat until you're full. That's number three. The next one he goes on and he says, one searching for a lost person or item. One who fears loss or harm to their property or livelihood. That's the next. One who fears the death of a relative or companion. One who fears harm from authorities, rain, or similar causes. Harm from rain or harm from similar causes. One pursued by a creditor while unable to repay. They have nothing to give. Or one who fears missing a travel group in similar cases. Okay, so there you go with the basic introductory section here, delivering for us general concepts, few rules through examples. So when looking at this in a little more detail to further understand excuse from Friday and congregational prayer, someone who is ill or sick, fears that they might become ill or sick. So if you remember back in COVID days, if you believed in that, if you were a believer, and you felt like, you know what, if I go out and I go to the masjid or I go to establish a congregational prayer some other location, I'm afraid that I might fall ill, and that illness, obviously it could have an impact, then you were excused from your prayers, Friday and congregational prayers. And guess what we weren't doing? We weren't praying in the masjid or congregational prayers for quite some time. Okay, so we can be rest assured that at the time, based on what we understood from the medical professionals, this was the right move to make. And so we took that advice and are excused, inshallah. As I mentioned, if you're already there in the masjid, well, the excuse is not there. There's no hardship in attending. If you're ill, it would be a hardship. It might result in your illness becoming more severe. It might result in a delay in recovery. Just the fact that you're ill, it might be difficult just to move about and get around, and so there's a hardship. But when you're already in the masjid, the hardship doesn't exist. And the other possible scenarios of getting worse or delaying recovery, they're also not applicable in this situation, so you have to stay in order to pray. Again, obviously, as he mentioned, someone who has to relieve themselves, they are excused. Here, you're supposed to be prepared for prayer such that you can focus and concentrate, such that you can be in the right state to where the prayer is going to be a beneficial experience, and that you're in the prayer present, not just going through the motions. Going through the motions with the right intention, meeting the basic requirements, will get the job done, but ideally it's going to be a means by which you draw near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? And the process requires presence. And when you're distracted with these natural feelings of, I've got to use the restroom, or I'm really hungry, all I can think about is food right now, especially when it's there. Imagine your favorite thing was just, you've been fasting or you've been waiting, it's time for your meal, and then your favorite dish is presented before you, and then it's like, wait a minute, we got to pray. More than likely, you're going to be thinking about these things, focusing on, well, I really need to hurry up because I got to go, or I'm really hungry and I'm waiting to get on that dish. And then he talks about someone who's worried for their wealth, that it would be lost. An example of this might be, if we think, in previous times, a riding animal wandering off. They had a horse or a camel. They weren't able to tie it up. There was no one able to stand guard and watch. Or maybe even if you're in an area that it's not a camel or a horse, it's something else. It's another form of wealth. Wealth is not just dollars and cents, it's property, it's valuables. You're in a scenario where, look, I'm worried if I leave this car right here right now to go, or this bike right here, I don't have a chain on it. If I leave the bike outside, then when I walk out, it's going to be gone. Okay? Not like here in our area, right? As we know, this is a very, the likelihood of that happening is almost nothing. Anything's possible, but if you were to say, hey, how do you feel about leaving your car unlocked or your bicycle outside out front of this particular masjid in this area, most of us would say, no problem. Yeah, there's no one here. There's nothing around. We're out here in the suburbs of Cherry Hill. Crime rate is low. But if you were in a different location, perhaps, where there's a higher crime rate, it's a lot of foot traffic, and there's people that are eyeballing this stuff, and it's a known area for those types of petty crimes or major crimes, depending on the value of the property. And you say, look, come on in for congregational prayer. Just leave your bike out there. It's like, look, I don't have a bike lock. I don't have anything. Yeah, but it's time for prayer. Where's your tawakkul at? Even they might throw a little religious sensitivity your way. And you say, well, wait a minute, let's think back to Imam al-Ba'ali, and what did he have to say? Well, I'm worried that this is going to get lost, so in that case, you're excused from performing the prayers here in congregation. All right, so that has to do with, again, number one, the Islamic law, our religion, isn't requiring us to put ourselves in harm's way or to sacrifice an unreasonable amount of wealth to fulfill our religious duties. And this could potentially do that at the first level. The second level is, how do you think you're going to be in prayer? What are you going to be thinking? I hope my bike's still there. I wonder, oh, please hurry up. The imam is taking too long. Come on, imam, just hammer this. Let's just bang this thing out so we can get down. I got to check on my car, my bike, whatever's out there. Yeah. So again, there's a multitude of reasons why this is a sensible concession here. Also, if you fear that your wealth would be harmed due to your absence. An example of this might be food burning or catching fire. All right, so you work in a shop, you work in a bakery, you got stuff in the oven, and now it's time for prayer. Congregational prayer is being established, and you're like, you know what? If I walk away from this in the oven, it's likely to burn. And it would be a destruction of property. It would harm your property, your valuables. And so in that case, you're excused as well from attending. Also, someone who fears harm in their livelihood. Livelihood that's required, by the way. So here, you'll note in the text, he says, it's a livelihood which is needed. Not, you're trying to get your vacation money right, you're trying to build your savings, you're trying to, deal with that discretionary income, which is what you have after everything's been accounted for. It's the extra amount. So we're talking about what's required of your livelihood. So for example, if you would be penalized for walking off the job, and it could result in you losing that job, which would put you in a terrible financial bind, such that you're now unable to pay for your housing, pay for your food, pay for your basic necessities, pay for those that are in your care and under your responsibility, then in this case, you're exempt. You're excused from attending. Okay? You'd be penalized, then you're excused. And this is important in our scenario because there are people that they don't get off for congregational prayer, let alone, I should say Friday prayer, let alone the regular congregational prayers. And when you are, Friday prayer, I believe, is pretty much agreed upon by everybody, but congregational prayer, when you're a person that believes that congregational prayer is an obligation, these sensible excuses are important for you so that you don't go crazy, right? And you don't end up ruining your whole world could come collapsing around you. Someone who fears that a relative will pass away, as he mentions, or a close friend. And this basically means that you're taking care of that person, and there's no one else to see to that care. You're there, you're the one, a family member, relative, close friend, you're in their care, and if you leave, it's possible that they could pass away. If you leave their care and their attention, then that could be a reason for them to pass on. And so you're excused so that you can stay and continue your care of them. Someone who fears harm from the leader or the ruler. And we talked about this in the class on Islamic morals and manners and etiquette. that sometimes the rulers were noted and are still noted to be oppressive in the way they execute the law. And so in the event that you're worried or fearful that you're going to be abused or harmed, and you going to the masjid or to the place of congregational prayer is a place in which they're waiting for you or looking for you, then you can avoid that and you'd be excused so that you're not put in harm's way. Or he mentions difficulty from rain or other natural elements like a flood or the presence of predatory animals, for example. You're excused from attending. So that's like when it's raining out, they used to say, pray in your homes. That was announced in the event. Pray in your homes, because those types of natural occurrences, the weather, it's raining, it's a flood, it's storming out, that could be difficult. Even today, with modern means of transportation, it can be difficult depending on the situation outside. Yeah, the chances of, number one, accidents, they go up when it's raining, depending on how hard it's raining, what the roads are looking like. And then, of course, you are going to end up getting wet, you can get dirty, muddy, etc. All these things are to be taken into consideration and could be legitimate excuses for you to not have to pray in congregation, or could miss the Friday prayer. Imagine a scenario, there's a wild animal out, a predatory animal out there in between you and where you're going to go pray. You're going to put yourself in harm's way potentially if you have to pass through or pass by. The next one he says is someone that's trying to avoid a creditor, meaning you've borrowed money from them and now they're hounding you, they're after you to get their money back, and you have no real means of paying the debt. Then you're excused, so you can avoid them until you're able to handle your debt. Or someone who's worried that they will miss their travel party, right? You're in the airport, for example. It's time for congregational prayer. It's also boarding time. And you'd have to pick between going to join the congregation, not certain as to whether or not you're going to make it before they close the gate, or skip the congregational prayer, potentially pray on your own, and then go board the plane or get on the bus. And this was a regular occurrence for me. If you've lived in the Muslim world, you'll know that they're praying in the airport all the time. Congregational prayers are being established. And it's a constant flow of people making those decisions. It's time to board. There's a congregation getting ready to start. I can either pray quickly and get on the plane in time, or they're going to, time between the adhan and the iqamah, there's going to be some time, etc. I can go and do that, and then I might miss the plane. Then you have to make these types of decisions, and you should feel comfortable in feeling excused from the congregational prayer so you don't miss your flight or your travel party. All right, so those are some important points to remember. After that he says, يلزم المريض أن يصلي قائما ولو كراكع معتمدا أو مستندا بأجرة يقدر عليها فإن لم يستطيع فقائدا متربعا ندبا وكيف قعد جاز فإن لم يستطيع فعلى جنبه والأيمن أفضل ويومئ بركوع وسجود عاجز عنهما ما أمكنه ويجعل السجود أخفض فإن عجز أومأ بطرفه مستحضرا الفعل بقلبه وكذا القول إن عجز عنه بلسانه. So now he moves on into how a person who is incapacitated in some form or fashion should pray. So he says it's required that the ill person pray while standing. This is very important here. It is required, so it's worth repeating. It's required that the ill person pray while standing, even in a bowing posture. Meaning that the ailment is such that you could stand, but you would be kind of hunched over. Even if that's all you can do, you have to stand. while leaning or being supported with compensation he can afford. We'll get to that. You're like, what does that mean? If unable, then they are to sit, with sitting cross-legged being preferred. Most people are sitting cross-legged right now. That's what that means. Where your legs are, what sometimes we call an Indian style. That's how I grew up in school. Indian style. You remember that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure what they call it today. Crisscross applesauce. They got all kind of things they do in school for kids. Okay, that's cross-legged being preferred. Though any seated posture is valid, if unable to sit, then they are to lie on their side, with the right side being better. They gesture for bowing and prostration when incapable to the extent possible. They gesture with their eyes, to the extent, making the gesture of prostration lower. Even if that is not possible, they gesture with their eyes while holding the action present in their heart. The same applies with the verbal elements if they are unable to speak. So here, again, this section in the text, the author is addressing those who possess an excuse, illness of some sort, stating that it's required that the ill person pray the obligatory prayers. You have to make that distinction there between the obligatory and the voluntary prayers or recommended prayers. Recommended prayers, voluntary prayers, while they're better standing, they can be prayed while seated. Obligatory prayers, no. They must be prayed standing with the ability. So praying the obligatory prayers while standing, this is considered an obligation according to consensus, al-ijma'. Okay, it's not like a unique ruling of the madhab. This is across the board. Even if they do so in a bowing posture or while leaning, while they're being supported, even if it requires them to pay for such support. Much like they would pay for water in order to make wudu. Meaning, if you got to go buy a cane, you gotta use some money to be able to support yourself. Maybe it means having somebody help you. You've hired help. Then in that case, you have to pay what's reasonable and within your means. Much like we have to make wudu. I don't have any water available unless I go buy a bottle of water. And if the bottle of water is at the normal market price and I can afford to pay it, I'm obliged. I'm actually obliged to pay for that so that I can fulfill my religious duties. All right, so here that's what he means by, having a financial element here and being able to support yourself in order to fulfill this obligation. And that should kind of hint to the nature of fulfilling this obligation. That is something that you might even have to offer some type of compensation or utilize your wealth in order to achieve. All right, so if you're a person, and I'm going to harp on this because it's something that I see frequently happen. If you're a person, for example, that prays while seated, but you can walk around and move and stand up. And the reason that you're sitting down is because I can't go into sujood and stand up. That's typically, a lot of people, that's their reasoning. I can't go onto the ground and bend down, and then I'll never be able to get back up. So the case is this. If you're physically capable of standing, you cannot start your prayer seated. You have to be standing. And you have to remain standing when you are capable of doing that. And we'll get on it in a little bit and see what Imam al-Badi has to say in his explanation here. Okay, so if they're unable to pray while standing, then they pray while seated in a cross-legged fashion as recommended. Otherwise, they can sit down in any possible posture, and that would be valid. So it's preferred that if you're going to sit down while praying, you sit as most of us are right now, cross-legged, on the ground. But because any seated posture is valid, it means you could sit on a chair, you could sit on a bench, on the edge of a bed, you could sit with your legs out, legs tucked under you, whatever posture would be perfectly valid. If you're unable to pray while seated, then you should pray while lying. And it's preferred that you pray lying on the right side. This is preferred over the left side. If you can't pray on the right side, then you pray on the left side because it's disliked to pray while lying completely on your back. The prayer is still valid, it's just disliked. And in this case, they're to gesture during the bowing and prostration positions when incapable of performing them. Right? If lying down you're unable to bow and prostrate, then you gesture. And they make the gesture for prostration lower than they would for the bowing position. So for example, if you're seated and you're not going to prostrate, but you can bow a little bit, then you would bow or lower your head perhaps, and then for the bowing gesture, and then you would lower even further for the prostration position. And this is an obligation in order for you to distinguish between the two acts. If they're unable to gesture with their head, then they can signal with their eyes. Signaling with the eyes would be done in the same way, such that a person is unable to move at all. You can't move at all. You can't even gesture with your head, right? Then in this case, you would use your eyes as a gesture, where your eyes go. Do they go down a little bit and further for sujood, etc.? That would be where you direct your gaze as a signal toward indicating these actions. And of course, during these scenarios in which the physical act is unable to be performed, as he mentioned, it has to be present in the heart, such that you're envisioning these motions in your heart. And then, of course, the same applies for the statements of a person that cannot utter the statements. They might not be able to say anything. Right? So then the statements will be present in the heart. Because as we know, prayer has actions and it has statements. And the statements, in a perfectly capable person, they must be uttered, such that even you're the only person that hears them. For example, during a silent prayer or when you're praying in congregation, they're actually uttered to the point that you're moving your lips with them and there's air moving. And the volume of it is such that your neighbors aren't hearing you. That's what's understood to be saying these things, not in your mind. It's not happening you're standing there and you're reading Al-Fatiha in your mind. That's not the same as your lips are moving and reciting it, even if silently. And so the in your mind thing or in your heart thing is only when you're unable to actually utter other phrases of the prayer. He says, وَلَا تَسْقُطُ مَا دَامَ الْعَقْلُ ثَابِتًا فَإِنْ قَدْرَ عَلَى قِيَامٍ أَوْ قُعُودٍ فِي أَثْنَائِهَا انْتَقَلَ إِلَيْهِ وَأَتَمَّهَا ولا تصح مكتوبة في سفينة قائدا لقادر على قيام تصح على راحلة واقفة أو سائرة لتأذن بوحل ومطر ونحوه أو لخوف انقطاع عن رفقة أو خوف على نفسه من نحو عدو أو عجزه عن ركوب إن نزل وعليه الاستقبال وما يقدر عليه ويعتبر المقر للأعضاء السجود فلو وضع جبهته على قطن منفوش أو صلى في أرجوحته ولا ضرورة لم تصح. All right. It's not waived so long as the intellect remains. If they stand or sit during the prayer, they must shift to it. If they can stand or sit during the prayer, they must shift to it and complete the prayer. Performing an obligatory prayer while seated aboard a ship is not valid for one who is able to stand. However, it is valid on a standing or moving mount if due to harm from mud, rain, and the like, fear of separation from a group, danger to one's life from an enemy, or inability to remount after dismounting. They must face the Qibla and perform whatever is possible. Consideration is given to the resting place of the limbs during prostration, so unnecessarily putting the forehead on fluffy cotton or praying on a swing invalidates it. All right, we're honing in on some more details here. Performing the prayer, he says, is not waived. That's what he means by it's not waived so long as you are still of sound mind. As we've discussed, as Imam Hanbali has highlighted, all of the possible scenarios of physical capacity or incapacity thereof. And it doesn't matter. As long as your mind is still sound, you're still obliged to pray, whether you move or you don't move. You're lying on your side, you're lying on your back, you're crumpled up into a little ball, you're bound together you're still obliged to perform your prayer. As long as your mind is there, you can pray. As is described, being physically incapable of performing the various acts and positions of the prayer, it does not excuse us from performing it. The various acts. So we talked about, if you can't stand, then you sit. If you can't sit, then you lie on your side. If you can't lie on your side, then you can lie on your back, etc., etc. But if you become capable of standing during the prayer, such that perhaps you regain the ability to do so, then once you regain that ability, you're required to move to that position. And then you carry on. You continue to pray accordingly. If one lying on their side becomes capable of sitting during the prayer, such that they've regained their ability to sit up, then they have to move to the seated position and then continue prayer accordingly. And this goes for all of the actions of the prayer, which one has offered a substitute due to an inability. If the inability is no longer existent or present, you have to return to the original state. And that's what I was alluding to earlier about sitting down while you're perfectly capable of standing. If the ability is there, then it must be done. Each position in the prayer is not linked to the position before or after it, such that if I can't do one, then I can't do them all. If I can't make sujood, then I don't have to make ruku'. If I can't make ruku', then I don't have to stand. If I can't make sujood and ruku', then I don't have to stand. I can stay seated the whole duration of the prayer. Right, so this concept of ability versus inability goes for all of the actions of the prayer. If at any time during the prayer you regain the ability, then you must move to that position immediately and pray according to that ability. He goes on and defines a little more. An obligatory prayer is not valid to be prayed seated while on a ship or vessel when the ability to stand is present. The obligatory prayer, remember, that's where these obligations are absolute. When you're on a ship or a vessel. So today's scenario would be like you're in the airplane. That's typically where you run into these things. You're in an airplane. It's where you're unable to dismount. In your car, what can be done in the car? You can get out, right? It's not a trick question. You can park and you can get out. And then you can not just park, but you can get out. Yeah. That's important. Yeah. Park. Not park and okay, now pray. Park and get out. So that you can do what? Stand and bow and make prostration and sit and fulfill the prayer as it's been described or prescribed. Okay? So we're talking about a scenario in which that's not possible, right? You can't get out of a ship. He's talking about a safina. It's a boat. Getting out of the ship means you're in the drink, bro. Yeah. Yeah, you're tripping. Yeah, you're not going to stand on water unless there's some type of karama happening. Okay? But if you are on a vessel where you can stand to perform your prayer, you can't stay seated. So for example, the airplane. If you're on the airplane and it's possible for you to stand up and perform the prayer according to its obligations, etc., description, then you're obliged to do that. Right? So in some airplanes, that's possible. Others might not be. It's going to depend on what they're going to let you do on the plane. Right? So some airlines will allow you to pray either because they've allotted a space for prayer, or they'll let you go back into the galley where they prepare all the concessions, the foods and the drinks and stuff, and they'll let you pray right there. And you can stand. And if that's the case, then you have to do that. And if you're uncertain, what do you think you have to do? You have to inquire. You need to ask. It's actually becoming an obligation for you to ask now. Remember, the concept is that whatever is needed to fulfill an obligation becomes an obligation itself. So now you have to figure that out. So you have to stop the flight attendant and say, listen, is it possible for me to utilize this space for prayer? It won't take long. Because it is permissible to move about the cabin at certain times during the flight. People do stand up. They do wait in line. They sometimes just get up and stretch and walk about. They go back and get sandwiches if you're on a long flight. Right? So it's very possible that you can get up and move about, and you would be obliged to figure that out in order to fulfill these obligations. If you're unable to stand up on a vessel, then your prayer would be perfectly valid for you to remain seated. If they say, look, short flight, no space, can't get up, turbulence, safety issue, not allowed, we're not going to let you. And if you start arguing and you start, whatever, you're going to get the homie. Come on, man. The on-plane guy. What's his name? The air marshal. Yeah, then what? We're going to get a video of you online. Yeah. Fighting with the air marshal over prayer. There you go. It's going to escalate from there. Okay? Could be. All right, and so that's something that that kind of understanding you utilize in all of these scenarios on a ship or on a vessel, on a plane, whatever it may be. If you can't stop and get down such that you can pray in a normal fashion on the ground or a solid surface, then you do your best. You fulfill the obligations based on your ability. It doesn't just all of a sudden give you this excuse that, nope, I don't have to do any of that. Right? He says here, an obligatory prayer is, however, valid while seated on a standing or moving mount in the presence of mud, rain, ice, or cold, which could cause harm or annoyance. Right? So thinking about, like, again, the older days, you're on a horse or a camel or something, and if you get down, you're going to jump down into the mud. It's done. It's been raining. It's muddy. It's a mess. There's snow. There's ice. Whatever. You get down into the ground, it's sloppy. Okay. In that case, you can stay mounted, and you can pray and do the best of your ability, as described previously. It's also permitted when they fear that the mount will be separated from the travel, or they will be separated from their travel party. They can stay mounted if they fear they're going to be separated from the travel party. Or they fear for their life due to the presence of an enemy or a predatory animal, or because they simply cannot remount after they've gotten down. Right? You had help getting up. You needed help getting up. And now you're on your journey. You're headed somewhere. If you get down, there's no one else to help you up, and you won't get up again. Okay? It's practical, sensible excuses here to keep in mind. The prayer in this manner, if you pray in this manner, you're required to face the direction of the Qibla, and then you do everything possible, which includes bowing and prostrating or gesturing for one or both of these, along with the other elements of the prayer, like at-tumatnina, trying to achieve the tranquility that's required in the prayer between the movements. You still have to try and perform the prayer in its most complete form. Illness is not an excuse which permits a person to perform an obligatory prayer while mounted, unless those previous excuses apply, like them being unable to get back up. So like normally the person's perfectly capable of getting up and down, but because of the illness that they have, they're not going to be able to get back up. They're simply too weak or incapacitated to the degree that their illness is going to prevent them. In that case, then the ill person, then they're perfectly fine. They can stay mounted, etc. Consideration, he says, is given to the resting place of the limbs during prostration. As we know, the Prophet ﷺ, he says, I was commanded to make sujood on 7 limbs. And he pointed at his his forehead, and he pointed at his nose, right? As we know, that's in the madhab, that's the forehead and the nose go together. And then the two hands, the knees, and then the feet. Al-taraf al-qadamain, which are like your toes. So those are the 7 limbs that he was commanded to prostrate upon. And the prostration is meant to be mutamakkin, such that they're well fixed or positioned on the ground. So if they were to put their forehead, he says, on fluffy cotton or very sponge-like material, that they're not making solid contact with the surface that they're praying on, or they're praying on a swing. It's not a solid structure, right? That's what he's talking about here. Doing this unnecessarily would be invalid. So the limbs have to come into solid contact with the grounded prayer surface, unless there's a valid reason otherwise. Unless there's a valid excuse for not to be praying directly on this solid grounded surface. All right. The next section, he says, يُسَنُّ قَصْرُ الصَّلَاةِ الرُّبَاعِيَّةِ لِمَنْ نَوَى سَفَرًا مُبَاحًا وَلَوْ لِنُزْهَةٍ أَوْ فُرْجَةٍ لِمَحَلٍ مُعَيَّنٍ يَبْلُغُ 16 فَرْسَخًا بَرًّا أَوْ بَحْرًا وهي يومان قاصدان إذا فارق بيوت قريته العامرة أو خيام قومه. It's recommended to shorten the 4-unit prayer for anyone who intends a permissible journey, even for leisure or sightseeing, to a specific destination that reaches 16 farsakhs, equivalent to 2 days' travel, whether by land or sea, provided they have departed from the inhabited dwellings of their village or the tents of their people. This is a favorite topic for many. Shortening prayer. We're not going to talk about combining prayer. That'll be the next time. That is even more beloved to many people, to combine the prayers together. People get very excited about that. Shorten prayer, combine prayer. All right? So, and the two, while they are related, they're not dependent on one another. They're related by way of the reasons which permit you to do that. They're not exclusive to each other, in that when you do one, you have to do the other. And we're going to learn about that right now. So shortening prayer is permissible according to consensus. It's permissible, jaiz, according to al-ijma' consensus. Right? That's the general ruling. In the madhab, it's recommended to shorten prayer, 4-unit prayer, so 4 rak'ah prayer, to a 2 rak'ah prayer. So, essentially, we're excluding Fajr and Salat al-Maghrib. You're not going to shorten Fajr to 1 or shorten Maghrib to 2 or 1. These two are not shortened in any case. Doesn't matter what the situation is, you do not shorten Fajr and Maghrib prayers. You shorten Dhuhr, Asr, and Isha. The act of shortening the prayer is recommended for those who intend a permissible journey. A permissible journey is talking about the objective and aim behind your travel. And when he says permissible journey, he's ruling out a journey which is not permissible, meaning a travel which is haram, or a journey whose end goal is makruh, disliked. And so what's permissible, as he mentions, even if the journey is for leisure, like you're traveling for vacation, or sightseeing, you're just going to check out a certain place. It also applies to travel which is generally permitted, such as business trips. Got to travel for work, then you can utilize these concessions. It's also understood, according to the fiqh of the madhab, that this concession applies to trips which are mostly permissible in nature, while there may be a smaller intent, a minor intent, to commit something that is either impermissible or disliked. So, for example, a person intends to travel for business. They have to go out of town, they have a bunch of business they're going to do, and then they're going to come back. But they also intend, while I'm there, I'll stop and get a drink. Not this either. I'll stop and drink. I'll just take one. One sip. I'm out of town. Nobody's around. Nobody's watching. Or whatever sinful act or disliked act that you know. The point is the intention is there. It's not like I intended to go for business, and when I was there, it just so happened that I did something impermissible. It was just by happenstance. It wasn't the nature of my trip. It wasn't the journey. It might have been like, look, I have a business trip out of my region, and in my region, they don't sell this stuff. It's not available. Like, that activity or that consumable is not even present. But I'm leaving the area, and it happens to be there. So while I'm going to be spending more than half of my time engaged in this business, permissible thing, I'm also kind of looking forward to doing this little act. All right, so that's what we're talking about here. So the general concept is al-hukm al-ghalib. Right, the ruling is based on what's prevalent, what is considered the overwhelming objective here. So if the intent of the trip is mixed like half and half of it's for this and half of it's for that, the objectives or the aims of the trips are such that half is permissible and the other half is impermissible or disliked, then, or the majority of the aim is impermissible or disliked, then in that case the concession doesn't apply. You're not afforded the concession to shorten your prayer. Right? The concessions are offered as an act of mercy to you. And someone who is committing a sin is not afforded mercy in this manner. The mercy they would be afforded is being forgiven through repentance. But they're not extended these concessions in our legal code. All right? This is also the case for someone who intends to travel for the sake of shortening prayer. This type of trip is haram. Like someone who intends to travel in order to break their fast. This is a haram trip, and so you're not afforded the concession. So in the event that you do it, not only is it haram to be traveling for that intention, but exercising the concession is not valid. So if you traveled and shortened a prayer, it means you didn't fulfill your obligation. You traveled in order to shorten the prayer, and then you actually did that, shortened the prayer. Number one, you weren't afforded the concession. It's not valid. It can't be applied. And because you did it, you didn't perform your obligation. So now not only are you sinful, but you have a prayer that you have to make up. Okay? So with that first layer, we're going to layer it here with so that we can tighten down a little bit on when this is possible. A permissible journey. It's not just a permissible journey only, but there are other stipulations. It applies to someone traveling to a specific location. There's a place I'm going to. It's not applied to someone who is aimlessly wandering around or traveling to sightsee without a final destination. They go, you know what? I just want to see the world. So I'm just going to take me wherever my dollar will carry me. I'll just go and I'll get to one place and then I'll, whatever the next, I'll just go to that place, whatever, like on a whim, whatever happens. There's no flight plan. There's no travel plan. You could do that. I'm going to go to 12 places, but I'm going to end up here. I have a destination. I'm going to go here, 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 and I'm going to end up there. Then you have a specific location that you're traveling. You're not just wandering. A person that's wandering is, while they are on the move, they might as well not be doing anything at all. They might as well be stationary because there's no real objective or location that they're heading to. Another stipulation is that the journey reaches the defined minimum distance. Okay, and this has been defined by the author as 2 days underway at an average pace, carrying light baggage, whether you're walking or you're on a mount like an animal. Imam al-Ba'di in the text here, in his explanation of Bidayat al-Abid, he breaks that down, further defining it in equivalent distances, because he talks about farsakh, which is a measure of distance that was utilized during a certain time in a certain region. And that's what they used to do, is they would transfer or they would provide equivalents to measurements so that the communities that they served and that authored works for would understand what that meant. But the understanding is it's a 2-day journey. A 2-day journey, as he mentions here. And he goes to the degree of defining the farsakh into smaller units all the way down to the width of a hair. Strand of hair. Such that he talks about the farsakh is equal to this amount of feet, or this amount of forearm, the dhira'a, which is equal to this amount of hand spans, equal to this amount of fingers, equal to this amount of hairs set up side by side. Right? And depending on how you gave those things number equivalents, you could arrive at a number that we would understand today. So the shortest that I've heard is 50 miles, roughly. Is this at 48 miles? Yeah. That's the thing. Hashemi mile is different. Yeah. So he gives you there like 12,000 feet. So it gives you quite a bit. Yeah. So the shortest being 50 miles is based on locations that the prophets that are highlighted in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Distances of one location to the next. And when you go look at the distance between those two locations, you'll see that it's about 50 miles. The longest that I've heard is 85 miles. This is U.S. miles, not Hashemite miles or whatever other miles that are out there. Okay, so these are the two that I've heard. 50 miles is based on the locations that are highlighted in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, and then the 85 miles is a number which scholars have arrived at based on giving numerical equivalents to these measurements here that Imam al-Ba'di is highlighting. Okay, so if the journey meets the minimum distance, the prayer may be shortened. That means that your final destination has to be at least that number. So if you said 50 miles, it has to be at least 50 miles. So if you're traveling 40 miles, you're not within the realm of applying this concession. 40 miles is not considered to travel long enough for you to apply the concession which permits you to shorten prayer. So you have to be going to a destination that is a minimum of this distance. And in that case, you may shorten the prayers, the 4-unit prayers to 2, Dhuhr, Asr, and Isha. And it doesn't matter how long it takes you to cover that distance. So it still applies even if you could travel that distance in a very quick time. You could travel that distance in less than an hour. Okay? Because before we talked about time, 2 days traveling. The 2 days traveling is not about time, it's about distance. And so that's why they said moving at an average pace, carrying your average baggage or luggage or whatever, is how far would they travel during that time. And this is the number that we get at. So even if today modern means of transportation allow you to cover that distance in a very, very quick time, you're permitted to apply this concession so long as the traveler who has intended permissible travel has left the inhabited dwellings of their village or the tents of their people. And this brings us to the next kind of layer here. Besides permissible travel, which meets the distance, now it is you have to have left your area. Which means if I'm going to travel, the journey is permissible. it's 100 miles, for example, that I have to go, and I'm still at home, I cannot shorten prayer. I have to be outside of my inhabited region. So like, I have to be going out. It's not just, and by the way, it's not just here in our area. It's like, there's Cherry Hill, there's Mount Laurel, there's Marlton, there's Maple Shade. They're just little townships. They're all connected. It means I have to be outside of the inhabited. That region is all one region. Just because they have little names to the neighborhoods. Like, I live in Point of Woods. The next neighborhood is called Green Tree. Right? So we don't want to be confused that, okay, once I leave Point of Woods, I'm out of my neighborhood, but I'm still in an inhabited, populated region. I'm still in the city. I have to be outside so that, like, I've left, and now I'm in the open space. It's just woods around me, like in our continent. It's just woods now. I'm on the road. It's just woods. The next inhabited area is Burlington County. I got to get past this buffer. There might be a buffer of open land. There's no inhabited places. There's no residents. That's when you can now begin shortening your prayer. Because you have to have left the inhabited region. Or, as he says, the tents of your people. So like so the inhabited region means permanent domiciles. Right? These are permanent structures. The tents he's talking about, even when you're like a nomad and you're just living in a little mobile village of tents, then that would be considered when you determine how you're going to begin. All right, these are the populated areas. He says, وَلَا يُكْرَهُ إِتْمَامٌ وَالْقَصْرُ أَفْضَلُ وَلَا يُعِيدُ مَنْ قَصَرَ ثُمَّ رَجَعَ قَبْلَ استكمال المسافة ومن نوى إقامة مطلقة بموضع أو أكثر من 4 أيام أو ائتم بمقيم أتم وإن حبس ظلما أو بمطر أو أقام لحاجة بلا نية إقامة فوق 4 أيام ولا يدري متى تنقضي قصر أبدا. He says, while shortening is preferred, completing the prayer is not disliked. One who shortens the prayer but returns before completing the full travel distance is not required to repeat it. Whoever intends to reside indefinitely in a location or for more than 4 days or follows a resident in prayer must complete the prayer. Perpetual shortening remains valid for one detained wrongfully due to rain or who remains to fulfill a need without intending to stay over 4 days and is unaware when the need will be resolved. In that case, you can shorten your prayer indefinitely. Okay? So let's take a look at this. This will be the last thing we're going to talk about here. So he says, it's not disliked to pray in full for those who are permitted to shorten their prayer. Remember, we said it's a recommendation. It's a recommendation. And normally the understanding is, if you avoid the recommendation, it's disliked. But in this case, it's not disliked to pray the prayer in full. Right? While it's recommended, you don't have to shorten your prayer. You can pray 4 rak'ahs while traveling. It's not disliked to do that. Okay? So if somebody were to do that, it shouldn't be off-putting to you. As exciting as it may be for you to shorten your prayer, it should not be off-putting that someone may pray in full, or the concept in and of itself. Right? It's preferred over praying in full, and this is explicitly stated by Imam Ahmad, that their preference is to shorten prayer. All right, so long as the conditions have been fulfilled, it is not required that the prayer be performed again for anyone who returns back home before reaching the minimum required distance. And that means that, for our example, 100 miles was my destination, and before I even made it past the 50-mile marker, I did stop and I prayed, I shortened the prayer, and then I realized, look, I got to go back. I was called back. Trip was canceled. Car broke down. Anything could have happened that caused me to return back. But because I fulfilled my obligation under the permissible conditions, it counts and is valid. It doesn't mean I have to go back and now have to fulfill the prayer again in full because I didn't actually pass the minimum distance which would permit me to shorten the prayer. It's the fact that that was the circumstance in which I prayed. It was allowable for me, even though I didn't fulfill it. The prayer is still valid in that case. Someone intends an unrestricted stay. This is another situation in a particular location, such that there is no timeline to leave. They must pray in full. They're going to stay there. In a specific location, they're staying there in an unrestricted manner. Like, I don't have a timeline in which I'm going to leave. I'm just staying here. It's kind of like open-ended. I'm going to stay here. Then in that case, you have to pray in full. You're like a resident at that point. Or if you intend to stay in a particular location for more than 4 days, according to the madhab, 4 days is the maximum amount you're allotted. That's 20 prayers. You're allotted 20 prayers in a location to permit you to shorten your prayers. If you're going to stay 25 prayers, 26 prayers and beyond, then you cannot shorten your prayer from the beginning. Meaning, you arrive and you know I'm staying X amount of days. Beyond these 4, I'm staying for 5 days in my location. Then the moment that I've arrived, I can no longer shorten my prayer. I'm praying as a resident. It doesn't mean I will pray the first 4 days shortening my prayer, and on the 5th day I will pray as a resident. No. You pray as a resident the entire duration if your stay is going to be beyond those 4 days, beyond those 20 prayers. And this is also explicitly mentioned by Imam Ahmad. If you're detained, meaning you're wrongfully prevented from freely moving, or you're detained due to rainfall, which would prevent your trip, or an illness perhaps that might stop you from being able to travel, or you had to handle some type of need, or you had to perform a military service. You know what I mean? Okay. And you didn't have the intention to stay for longer than the 4 days. Or in a circumstance in which you did not know when those defined scenarios will come to an end, then this is when you can perpetually shorten your prayers, even if it lasted for years. So you were there, your intention was not to be there beyond that allotted time, or you were there for a reason to handle some need without a known end time, then in that case you can continue. So a scenario might be this. We're traveling, and we go to our destination. We're only going to be there for 3 days. We've been shortening our prayer. It's time to leave. We get in the car doesn't start. We got a breakdown. Take the car to the mechanic. It gets towed or whatever. Mechanic says, I'll get to work on it right away. And you say, how long is this going to take? He says, I have no idea. I'm going to diagnose, and then I'm going to see what we got. Then I'm going to have to order some parts. Then I'm going to get to work. And then we're going to take it from there. I have no idea. And 3 days leads to 4. 4 days leads to 5. Still not working. He still doesn't know when. He has no, I don't know. I keep finding stuff. I don't know. It's unended. And in that position, you can continue to shorten the prayer. If he says to you, it's going to take 2 days. Now you know. You have a defined time. It's going to take a week. The car will be ready in 1 week. Now you have a defined time. It's not an open-ended time that's not in your own choosing. Much like when you would be detained wrongfully, right? You're traveling. They wanted your documentation now because they're looking for that. They identified you as a potential illegal. You're not an illegal. You're wrongfully detained. And now you have no idea when you're going to be released. You're in a scenario in which perpetually shortening, or I should say shortening prayers is permissible, as he describes there with some of the other scenarios. For example, another one, for example, our trip. We're going to the airport. We get there. It's a 3-day trip. They say all flights are grounded due to weather. Well, when's it going to open up? Well, we have no idea. It's a Category 5 tornado out there, homie. We're grounded. No timeline. It's just based on circumstances. And it drags on for days because it's a circumstance in which you have no control over and no intention behind. And it's not by your choosing, I'm just going to stay here open-ended. Then in this case, you can perpetually shorten. Otherwise, when you know it, the time period, or you've controlled the circumstances and left it unopened, unended, then you have to pray in full. And that's where we're going to wrap up. Jazakallah khair wa sallallahu alaihi wa sallam.